It's -34 tonight. And I'm standing at the edge of this settlement with a bucket of frozen fish and what I can only describe as a very bad feeling. The call came through about 2 hours ago. A bear on the perimeter. That's the phrase they use up here. Not polar bear sighting. Not wildlife alert. Just bear on the perimeter. Everyone who lives in this town knows exactly what that means. And everyone knows exactly what usually happens next. I've been up here for 6 days now, embedded with the small community that occupies this stretch of the northwestern coast. 40-some people. A cluster of prefab structures. A fuel depot. A community building that doubles as everything else. The nearest road of any kind is about 300 kilometers south. In January, in the dark, this place is as far from the rest of the world as anywhere I've ever been. And tonight, somewhere out past the lights of the settlement, there is a polar bear that cannot find food. I want to tell you what that looks like. Because I think most people picture polar bears the way they appear in photographs: massive, white, confident. The kind of animal that moves through the world like it owns everything it touches. That image is real. I've seen it. I've seen bears on the sea ice that move with a power that makes everything else seem small. This bear does not look like that. The first person to see him was a woman named Nadia, one of the community's permanent residents, who spotted him from her kitchen window just before the sun went down, which happens here around 2 in the afternoon. She described him as gray. Not white. Gray. The way a white thing looks when it has lost too much of itself to still look like what it was. She didn't call the regional wildlife authority right away. She called her neighbor. Her neighbor called the community coordinator. And that's when I got the knock on my door. When we found him, he was about 400 meters outside the settlement perimeter, moving along the fence line in that slow, swaying walk that tells you immediately something is wrong. Polar bears in good condition don't move like that. They move with purpose, with economy. Every step means something. This bear was covering ground the way something does when it's still going, because stopping feels worse. But it has no actual destination anymore. He was thin in a way I wasn't ready for, even though I knew what to expect. His hips were visible from 50 meters. His shoulder blades rose like handles. The fur along his flanks had that rough, uneven texture that you see in animals that have been burning muscle for fuel, the body consuming itself from the inside. His head looked almost too large for the rest of him, the way a sick animal's head always seems disproportionate when the body beneath it has shrunk. He didn't look at us right away. He was working a section of ground near what appeared to be an old dump site, the kind of subsurface material that accumulates in Arctic settlements over decades. Half-frozen layers of organic matter that a hungry bear can smell through 2 feet of packed snow. He was digging, slowly, with a kind of exhausted persistence that was hard to watch. I stood there for a minute, just watching him work that patch of ground. The way his front paws moved not with power, but with the mechanical repetition of something operating on the last available reserves. This was not a predator hunting. This was something else entirely. And that distinction, it turns out, was going to matter a great deal in the next few hours. I'm going to tell you what the protocol is, because you need to understand the weight of what the people in this community were deciding tonight. In most jurisdictions across the Canadian Arctic and the Russian North, a polar bear that enters a settlement perimeter and displays what's called food conditioning behavior, meaning it's actively looking for human food sources, is subject to lethal removal. This is not arbitrary. Polar bears kill people. They are the only large predator on Earth that actively hunts humans as prey. A starving bear in a residential area is not a symbolic danger. It is an immediate, serious, documented danger. The decision to shoot is almost always the legally defensible one, and in many cases it is the right one. The people here knew all of this. They also knew this bear. Not specifically, they hadn't seen this individual before, but they knew what he was, in the way that people who have lived alongside apex predators for generations develop a literacy for them. Nadia had watched him for 20 minutes before she called anyone. She'd watched the way he moved, the trajectory he was following, the distance he was keeping from the actual structures. She had an opinion about this bear. It wasn't soft or sentimental. It was practical. He's not hunting, she told me. He's starving. Those are different things. The distinction matters more than it might sound. A bear that is hunting behaves differently from a bear that is desperately foraging. The posture is different. The eye contact is different. The movement patterns are different. A hunting bear is reading you. A starving bear is barely reading anything at all. Its world has narrowed down to calories. You also need to understand what the ice situation looks like right now, because the bear doesn't exist in isolation from it. The sea ice that polar bears depend on for hunting ringed seals, their primary food source, the thing that keeps a large predator alive through an Arctic winter, has been forming later and breaking up earlier every year for the past several decades. A bear that can't get on the ice can't hunt. A bear that can't hunt burns through its fat reserves. A bear that is burned through its fat reserves starts burning muscle. And a bear burning muscle is what I was looking at in that dumping ground tonight. A predator with the power of a large car and the reserves of something that has already almost run out of time. The people in this community understand this without needing anyone to explain it. They watch the ice. They have watched it their whole lives. They know what it looked like when their parents were young, and they know what it looks like now. Two of the men from the community, brothers, I think, though I never quite confirmed, this had already loaded a snowmobile with a supply of frozen fish pulled from the community's winter stores. This was not a small thing to give. Food up here is expensive and difficult to replace, and winter has a long way left to go. They had discussed this, and they had decided. The plan had a simple logic to it. Get the snowmobiles between the bear and the residential area. Lay out fish at intervals, spaced far enough apart that each piece pulls him a little further in the right direction away from the settlement, toward the coast. Keep the snowmobiles moving just enough to create a soft boundary the bear feels without feeling trapped. Give him a reason to keep choosing the direction that keeps everyone alive. I stayed back during the first approach. This was not my operation, and I was not going to make it harder. I watched from about 200 meters, standing next to Nadia, who had come out in full winter gear with a calm that I found both reassuring and slightly unnerving. The first piece of fish landed about 60 meters ahead of the bear. He stopped. I want to be precise here because this moment mattered. He didn't lunge. He didn't charge. He lifted his head from the ground and turned toward the smell. His nose was working, you could see it even at that distance. The way his muzzle moved through the air in small arcs. Processing. Testing. He took 3 steps in the direction of the fish. Then he stopped again. There was a long pause where nothing happened except the wind and the sound of the snowmobile idling somewhere to the east. The bear stood there in the dark at the edge of the light spill from the settlement, completely still. A pale shape against the darker gray of the snow. His breath was visible, small clouds appearing and disappearing in the cold air. Then he walked to the fish and he ate it. Not quickly. Carefully. The way something eats when it has learned that food might be taken away, or might not be real, or might be the last thing. He ate every piece, worked the ice around it, stood over the spot for a few extra seconds. Then he raised his head again. The second piece of fish was further away, further from the settlement, further toward the coast. He found it the same way. Nose first. That slow, methodical approach. He ate this one faster. I'm not going to tell you this was effortless, or that it looked like a nature documentary where everything resolves cleanly. About 30 minutes in, the bear swung wide without warning a hard left, away from the fish line, straight toward the outer wall of the fuel depot. Both snowmobiles repositioned hard and fast to block that angle. And then everything stopped. He was maybe 40 meters from the structure, close enough that I could hear the creak of his weight shifting on the snow from where I was standing. The men on the snowmobiles cut their engines to idle and went completely still. Nobody on the ground moved. Nobody spoke. I remember exactly what it felt like to stand there. The cold had been in my hands for a while by that point, the kind that moves past discomfort into something that feels like pressure, like the joints themselves are being squeezed from the outside. I had my hands jammed into the pockets of my parka, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was watching the bear. The way his head was up now, oriented toward the fuel depot, reading whatever information the building was giving him through the air. His sides were moving with each breath. Slow, deliberate. The men on the snowmobiles sat there in the dark like they were made of it. Not a word. Not a movement. Just two people in the cold who had done this calculation and were now waiting to see what the bear decided. It felt like 4 minutes. It might have been less. It might have been more. He turned away. Nobody said anything when he did. Not immediately. There was just a collective exhale that I could feel more than hear. And then the snowmobiles started moving again, one of them looping wide to drop the next piece of fish further down the line. Nadia, standing beside me, said something in a low voice that I had to ask her to repeat. "He's deciding," she said. "Every time he stops, he's deciding. We just have to be worth deciding in favor of." The fish trail continued for about 800 meters. The bear followed it, not perfectly, not in a straight line, but consistently in the right direction, away from the settlement, toward the open ground that leads eventually to the coast. And if the ice is where it needs to be, toward the hunting grounds that are the only reason a bear this far gone might still have a chance. At one point, he sat down. Just sat. On the snow, about 300 meters from the last piece of fish, facing roughly northwest. The snowmobiles held their positions. He sat for perhaps 5 minutes. I couldn't see his face from where I was standing, but I could see his posture, not the collapsed posture of an animal giving up, but something more like a pause. Like he was working through something that none of us could read. Then he stood up, and he kept moving. I noticed Vasily about 10 minutes before the bear reached the end of the light spill. He was standing maybe 30 meters to my left, which meant he'd walked out from the settlement at some point while I was watching the bear, and I simply hadn't seen him arrive. He's in his 70s. He's lived on this coast for most of his life. He was watching the bear with the same flat, careful attention that everyone up here seemed to give large animals no drama in it, just observation. He said something as the bear reached the last piece of fish. The translator beside me listened, then told me that Vasily was talking about his grandfather, about a bear that had come to their camp when he was a young boy, and how the older men had handled it. Different circumstances, different tools. But the underlying idea, Vasily said, had been the same. His grandfather's words, roughly translated, if you don't have to make an enemy, don't make one. The bear crossed the outer edge of the light spill and moved into the dark. We watched with headlamps and the one decent pair of binoculars anyone had remembered to bring. He was visible for a while as a pale, moving shape, and then he wasn't visible. And then there was just the dark and the wind and the sound of the settlement generator somewhere behind us. I don't know if that bear made it to the ice. I want to be straight about that. He walked away from this settlement tonight with a few kilograms of frozen fish in him and an open stretch of tundra between here and the coast. Whether the ice is where it needs to be, whether his body has enough left to make the distance, whether he finds what he needs when he gets there, none of that was settled tonight. None of that is something I can tell you. What was settled tonight was smaller than that. One bear moved away from one settlement on one night in January. That's the full scope of what happened out there. I asked Nadia later, back inside, over tea, why they hadn't just called it in. Let the wildlife authority handle it. Remove themselves from the decision. She thought about it for a moment. We live here, she said. The bear lives here. The authority does not live here. If something goes wrong between us and the bear, the authority drives away afterward. We stay. It wasn't a criticism. It was a geography. I went to bed that night thinking about the bear out in the dark, about whether the calories in those fish were enough to make a difference, about what the ice looks like north of here right now, and whether he'd reach it in time. The cold outside was the same cold that was pressing on him, and somewhere in it he was still moving, or he wasn't. I didn't have answers. I still don't. What I have is the image of him sitting in the snow out there, facing northwest, in that pause that nobody could name. That pale shape in the dark. Still breathing. Still making calculations the rest of us aren't built to follow. The tundra doesn't have happy endings. It has outcomes. Some animals make it through and some don't. And the ice keeps doing what the ice is doing. That's the reality of this place. And the people who live here carry it every single day. They knew all of that tonight. They went out anyway. I'm Daniel Hayes. Thanks for being here with me.